Hey, this is Morgan Pratt with the JMac for Congress campaign. If you're listening to this podcast, sounds like you like JMac. You can find out more about him by going to his Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube channel. Please remember to subscribe and rate us. Now coming up, more JMac.
Hello there and welcome into another edition of the JMac podcast. I have been processing and investigating and thinking and worrying and wondering about the impeachment proceedings for our current president of the United States. And I've been wondering if the framers of our Constitution, if they got it right. Now, maybe they got it right and it was right for a couple of hundred years, but they couldn't predict the political and partisan turmoil that we would be in. And so maybe it's time to reconsider certain parts of the Constitution as written. Could they have foreseen a time when right and wrong was no longer decided by right and wrong? It was now decided by right and left. When otherwise fair-minded people who are intelligent, who are wise, cannot look at an issue and determine whether or not something is right or wrong because they are in too deep. They are too partisan to be able to answer some basic questions. Could they have predicted that? This has been something that I have been thinking about quite a bit for the last few weeks, and I lament the fact that I can't get your text messages right now. While I was on KSL, I could get your instant text messages. I can't get those right now. So I'm going to rely on your commentary on our social media, and we'll do a follow-up podcast with your thoughts and your feelings. The vote happened last week to have open impeachment hearings. The vote was it passed, but not a single Republican voted in favor for it. Right down party lines. Is right or wrong really decided by right or left? I want you to think about that. Now, the other thing that I want you to think about is, how do we decide if something is criminal in any other aspect of society? In society, according to the Constitution, we decide if something is criminal. We have a pretty good system of due process. We have innocent until proven guilty. We have a jury of your peers. We have all of these things that are put in place to protect somebody, to protect an American citizen from being railroaded, from partisanship, from bias. All of these systems built in. None of those systems are in play when it comes to impeachment. None of them. Now, you might say, well, impeachment is not a criminal prosecution. Nobody's going to jail. Somebody's just losing their job. Well, impeachment is based upon the phrase high crimes and misdemeanors. So it is a determination as to whether or not criminal activity occurred. Yet, is there a presumption of innocence? Is there a jury, an impartial jury? Is there an attempt at impartiality? No, there isn't. Now, that's where I have to ask the question. Is the idea that it is up to the House of Representatives to determine whether or not a president has committed a high crime or misdemeanor, is this the way that things should go forward? Or should we look at our current circumstances and say, whoa, slow down a minute here? The framers of the Constitution made it way too easy for somebody to be removed on a partisan basis. And they literally gave the President of the United States no protections. No innocence until proven guilty. None of that. They're just not there. They're not in play. Now, I want to preface some of what I'm going to say here with my reiteration of the belief that what the president did with Ukraine is wrong. And it should not have happened. And I don't stand by it. I don't support it. And the way that I come to that conclusion is I use something called the partisan reversal test. I ask myself the question, okay, if this was Hillary Clinton in office and she was doing the same thing with a foreign nation against somebody who was polling very well against her, a Republican against her in the polls, would I accept it? Would I say, oh yeah, would I be out defending her? Would Republicans be out defending her? And the answer is no. But impeachment is not about whether or not something was right or wrong. Impeachment, as defined by the Constitution, is about whether or not something was criminal, high crimes and misdemeanors. And we currently have a situation where apparently every elected Republican thinks this wasn't a crime, and every elected Democrat thinks this was a crime, with maybe 2 exceptions. Now think about that. Think about if you're the president of the United States for a moment, not President Trump. You don't think about it in terms of President Trump. Think about it in terms as a president who is facing an impeachment hearing. What protections do they have? There's not a lot. There's executive privilege, right? But that can get overturned. And I'm just exploring this issue with you because I'm starting to wonder if we should implement the same processes that we do for regular everyday citizens, if we shouldn't implement those for the president of the United States. So, for example, what if the House of Representatives, whose job it is to investigate, what if they were required to convene a grand jury or even a jury? So they have their hearings, they have their investigation, they do them quietly behind closed doors, like a grand jury. And then the leaders of the Senate have to go to this impartial jury and they have to present their case. And the grand jury decides whether or not they believe that a crime was committed. Because again, this is how we decide criminal behavior for you and me. We get those protections. President of the United States? No, he doesn't. And again, I'm not arguing this for the sake of President Trump. My concern is always the future of this country and how partisanship has gotten so ugly. As I've said several times already, right and wrong is no longer right and wrong. It's right and left. So what if they had to present to a grand jury? And then if the grand jury chose to indict, then the Senate would have to call a jury, an impartial jury, if you could find one at this point. That's why I would prefer everything happen behind closed doors. And then the impartial jury gets to decide whether or not there was a high crime or a misdemeanor. And by the way, while we're in this process, we should clarify in the Constitution, because we don't like vagueness, what is a high crime and misdemeanor. Because in today's world, everyone on the right, at least the elected Republicans, do not believe a crime was committed. Everyone on the left believes one was committed. So now what? Partisanship rules the day. And I've already told you how this is going to play out. We already know the House is going to impeach President Trump. We've known that since day one. It's going to happen. We already know the Senate is not going to vote to remove the president. Why? Because we can count votes. We can already decide and know outwardly how these people are going to vote. Now, if that was the case, if you were sitting there and your jury was being selected, and you're being charged with a high crime or misdemeanor, and your jury was being selected, and you asked a member of the jury or the prospective jury pool, hey, have you already decided on this case? And they say yes. Are you going to keep that juror on your juror pool? Of course not. You're going to seek impartiality. But we have none of that today. That's why we have to take a look at this whole process and start asking questions about whether or not, in this case, the founders got it right. And as I said, maybe it was right for a few hundred years. But could they have seen how ugly, how partisan things would have become? I've seen enough Law and Order to know that there is a huge process that is gone through to decide whether or not something is criminal. That's what should be happening right now in the case of our own president. Did he commit a high crime or misdemeanor? If he didn't, then you may not like what happened, like I don't like what happened, but you would say, okay, let the voters know, and the voters will decide. If he did commit a high crime or misdemeanor, that determination should be made by an impartial group of people who are able to assess the facts without their political leanings. And then once they decide that a high crime or misdemeanor happened, then consequences can be rendered. I really want you to think about this and process this. Do you think right now that the President of the United States can get a fair trial to decide whether or not he committed a high crime or misdemeanor? You already know the answer for that. And if you know that he can't get a fair trial, then is this process fair? Is it just? And if it were happening to you in an everyday situation, you would be squawking and you would be paying your attorneys to get a change of venue, to get a change of jurors, to get a mistrial, to get whatever you can. Fairness is important in our society, especially when there are real consequences. Is this process fair based upon the players involved? I say no. I say not even close. What do you say? Let me know in the comments. Is it time that we rethink how the impeachment process happens so that whoever's accused can get a fair shake? Is that too much to ask, that they get a fair shake? Or are you too steeped in political partisanship that you've already decided who's guilty and it doesn't matter if they get a fair trial or not? Think about it. Leave me your comments. We'll have a follow-up podcast as we decide how things should go forward with our president.
Thanks for listening to the JMac podcast. If you'd like to donate to JMac for Congress, you can go to jmacforutah.com. That's jmacforutah.com.